Greetings, everybody. Look, I'm coming with the energy today. Yeah, man, I want to talk about how I made a huge mistake. I mean, we all make mistakes, right? But I made a huge mistake as far as just distributing this to the world in a certain way. Like I did it the wrong way. So I'm going to talk about that in this episode. I'm gonna also touch on this idea of the legit hustle trap, right? I don't know if some of y'all know my background, but I didn't used to do business and live my life in the most quote unquote legitimate fashion. Now, when we say legit, I'm just purely speaking about the law, right? Which I don't always, I'm not the biggest supporter or advocate for all the laws in America, but I'm sure that'd be a little bit evident in my biasness to my own self-worth, right? I would hope that we all have a biasness to our humanity, that being treated like a human comes first. So without any further ado, this is going to be our next recorded episode, done the way that I believe I'm going to continue to do these episodes, as far as distributing them as a podcast. I'm thinking about calling this the Still Growing Podcasts or something like that, because it's really about capturing concepts and conversations in real time. Shoot, concepts and conversations doesn't sound bad. If you don't know me already, I'm terrible with naming things. So without me going on and on, in a vague manner, I want to talk about the legit hustle trap. And then throughout all of that, I'll highlight some things that have been currently going on. But let me tell you what I did wrong first. Let's just get that out the way. I don't want to prolong that too much longer, right? So recently, I uploaded an episode in a podcast form similar to what I'm doing right now. And I actually loved it. I loved it. I loved the way that it happened, right? And wow, that was amazing. Somebody just subscribed. Somebody shouts out to my man's Dom. Dominique, 1random9, right? That's my guy. I appreciate you. I see that you just subscribed. So hopefully you're hearing this shout out in real time as I'm literally witnessing it coming down my phone, right? So what I want to go back to was the initial point. So I made a podcast called the Matriarchal Alliance, right? Now we're going to continue to talk about 1random9 real quick. We're going to keep talking about him because I really do hope you hear this, man. You've been somebody who's been very supportive of me ever since I've met you, from the Newports and News days, even sharing my work. And I hope that I can amplify your work through this platform, as I always have, but will continue to do, right? You are one of the first people we used to love posting on the Newports and News YouTube channel. We've evolved and gotten so much more stronger as a platform since then. So I really look forward to amplifying your message as well. So thank you. I just want to make an ample and meaningful effort to truly show my gratitude, because without people like yourself, we would just be talking to nobody or being subjected to social media, right? And not having a true voice and a true equity in our own growth, right? So what do I mean by that? I would like my work to reflect how much I actually benefit from it. And on social media, that doesn't always align that way. So I look forward to sharing this space with you so that you can get, more of an alignment with the work that you're doing and the results that come from it. Okay. So going back to the initial story, guys, I just feel like it's important to shout out our paid subscribers as they come into the fruition. Shouts out to Miss Sharon's mom. Shouts out to Miss Michelle. Shouts out to Miss Yasmin. Shouts out to Kiera. These are some of our paid subscribers. I hope that this list gets so long that I cannot spend time doing it. So we'll put them in the show notes and all of that as well. So my first podcast episode, I'm hitting my fist. I'm sorry. I'm getting used to my broadcasting stuff. I can't be too emotive in here. The audio picks up everything. In my first episode called the Matriarchal Alliance that I recorded here on Substack, and then I distributed through YouTube, sounded fine. Everything came through well, at least with the resources that we have. I feel like that's a perfect opportunity to talk about what the paid subscription is for. Actually making better equipment and better setups. I'm sure y'all might even hear the ambulance outside my house right now if you're looking. So it's like being able to create a studio environment and things like that. But our immediate goal is to have visual episodes, right? We want to be able to put this on YouTube so that we can grow our audience and make this publication more powerful, right? So the goal here, and this is a teachable moment, I'm going to close this door so hopefully we don't hear this. Yeah. So just things like that. So I don't have to be a one-man show and close my own doors and, edit everything. And, but yeah, we want to make this a visual show. So this is a teachable moment. YouTube is a search engine, right? So that means people can go on Google, they can go through their AI, they can go through different search engines, and they can type things in, and then things that are related to their searches will come up, right? So that's what we want our work to do. We want our work to populate in people's searches. So when we have topics that they're interested in or things that they want to learn, our podcast comes up and then they can listen to it. But video is the most search form of media, right? It's not these audios, it's not these podcasts, it's not being on Substack. It's on YouTube. YouTube is where most people search things. I'm pretty sure you've searched anything from how to cook something to how to buy something to where to go, and there was a YouTube video that came right along with it. Well, that's the search engine that we want to be inside of. It's called SEO, search engine optimization. So we want to be optimized for that. And that's why we want to have a visual version of the show so that people can find these deeper dives, these articles in the space that we're cultivating for independent media through YouTube, and then it'll bring them to Substack. So that is why the $8 subscription is super important, because it allows me to hire somebody who's willing to help me do this, right? I could easily set up the camera and do it myself, but I've been doing this for 8 years, and I know how easy it is to start burning out when you take on too many responsibilities. And burnout just means you're not willing to continue consistently with what you started. So that's what this is all about, right? It's about making sure that the media is consistent, that it's crisp, that it comes through good. So our first 10 subscribers will be the threshold, if you will, so that I can pay someone to sit in and help me record these episodes, make sure it gets on YouTube. And then, hopefully from there, we'll hit our next milestone, and that will give us equipment. We'll hit our next milestone, and it'll create other publications and other forms of us giving back to the people who support us. So with that being said, getting back to the Matriarchal Alliance, which was the first episode, and if you haven't checked that out, every episode is out for 4 weeks for free. And then I believe it goes into a paid archive. So that's also why the YouTube is important, so that people can have something that they can go back to for free and always find for free. And I wrote about the matriarchs in my life that have supported the movement and supported my work, whether it's my employment, whether it's my ability to have a safe place to create at, and whether it's just being a steward and an advisor. Black women have been essential to my growth here in Philadelphia. So shouts out to them. It deserved its own episode. And it went excellent. That was a good episode. Now, I had a bright idea. I'm the media strategist, right? And I was like, okay, I have these still growing sessions that I do in person. There are these live events that I've done. And typically we get on the microphone, I'll have a few guests, and we'll talk about things that are prompted in the magazine. I'm actually working on getting the magazine to y'all in some capacity. So look out for that. For the paid subscribers, you'll have access to the Still Growing magazine every issue. Once we figure out how to format that in the most high quality experience way, I could just upload it in a PDF or something plain and simple, but I want it to really be an experience for y'all. So look out for that as well. So with those Still Growing sessions, I wanted to upload them in our podcast feed. It's called an RSS feed. We're not going to get into that today. That's much more complicated, but basically it's the way that people listen to things online. And I don't like it. I don't like it at all. I don't like how it sounds. It sounds echoey. It doesn't have a proper introduction. I just don't like how it's set up. So I think I might refrain from doing that. It's actually inspired me to start a channel for Still Growing, just so that the content there can lead people here, and then start forming some articles and some resources specifically for Still Growing. But like I said, this is all new. I just started this in about maybe March. So the goal is really to learn the platform and grow with it and find the best ways to distribute media to the people who like to hear it. And so I realized that is not one of my favorite ways. I'm not super interested in that. Now, the video style is cool because it creates a dynamic where you can see that the camera is moving to a different person who's talking versus me. And it's just a much more, like I said, meaningful and high quality experience when you're watching it with the video. When you're just hearing the audio, it can seem a bit awkward. So I didn't like it. Y'all let me know how that sounds if you ever do run into it. Currently on YouTube, it's not doing very well. So I'm going to take that as, it's a beginning point. It's doing better than other things that I've put out. So let me not say it's not doing well, but I mean, what do we all want, right? We want thousands of listeners and, comments and shares and subscribers. We didn't accomplish that, but we accomplished getting it done. So round of applause for that, right? Right there. See, right there, I would have had a round of applause if I had like the editors and all that stuff. So, this is why the subscription is important. Now let's get into the conversation of today, right? Now that we got out the mistake part, and if you're still here, that means you're really here for the story and the importance of what this episode is going to be about, right? So I wrote an article called The Trap of the Legit Hustle. So I wanted to create an audio version of this episode because not only does it explain a lot more about who I am, but I know that it'll provide perspective to especially younger people who haven't really gotten into the world yet, and also to our elders and our parents and our community leaders who are stewarding children, right? I think this would be important for y'all to hear as well, just due to the fact that it gives you a look inside of the mind of people my age and generations younger. So I'll start off by telling a little bit about my own story, right? Back when I used to, be in the streets primarily, right? I didn't have a job. And I think it's an important thing to unpack as far as being in the streets. A lot of people think Black men like being in the streets, right? Or being street men. But if you do a little bit of history, right? Street life or street men started with white men who weren't going to war. Like after World War I and World War II, you just had a lot of young men that were white kind of roaming the streets. This is also how the invention of high school became more prevalent. Prior to that, I think people were only going to about 8th grade. But then high school was created literally to just stop young white men from loitering. And, the military was a place for them to go. So this is why, being a street man wasn't originally being a Black man. Being a Black man prior to civil rights and, during Jim Crow was just loitering, and it was criminalized so that they could incarcerate you. You weren't even actually looked at as a man. You weren't a citizen in most people's eyes who were voters and taxpayers, so-called, right? So that's why the idea of, being a street nigga or a street person is very prejudiced, to say the least, very discriminative. To associate that Black men inherently want to be in the streets is so far away from the truth, right? We've been systemically removed from society and participating at it. We have been systemically, targeted for incarceration and a bunch of other things. So when you see young Black boys in the streets, that is a product of consuming media that has been broadcasted and amplified for its violent and predacious nature, right? What do I mean by that? Large companies choose which artists they want to highlight the most. And when they highlight Black men who glorify the streets, not because they're good people, not because they have the best music, but because they know it influences young groups of people, we then have to look at how that actually influences those young Black men, right? It'd be different if they had an influence to say, go to the military, right? Like they don't platform that, or be a Christian or go to school. Why wouldn't they amplify those messages? They have the same money and the same ability to do it. And I know you're hearing this like, TJ, people don't want to hear that stuff. They want to hear what they want to hear. But that's multi-generational. I could ask my parents right now to listen to hip hop and they wouldn't like it, right? And even older people don't like it because they didn't grow up exposed to that as much as people my age and younger. So there's a big difference in how music is consumed just based on how it's appropriated and broadcasted. So going back to the street life and the street man idea, I was initially in the streets not because I didn't have good grades, not because I didn't want to go to college, and not because I didn't want to get a job. It was because my financial aid ran out when I did go to college. And then when I did apply for jobs, I could only get entry-level service jobs. And I didn't want to be a manager of a fast food restaurant at 32 years old, right? That was what I knew I didn't want to do. There's a quote that an older gentleman told me when I was in the streets. When somebody tried to take my life, someone tried to murder me, he told me, you either have to take that same action to them or you have to flee, you have to leave. And at least if you leave and get you a job, even if you're only making $7.25, which is still the national legal pay rate, right? I mean, this was back in when he told me this was at least 10 years ago. So that speaks to why a lot of young Black men don't want jobs, is because they are underpaid. You don't make a livable wage, and you're stripped of all of your time and autonomy and ability to develop self and your character and have experiences in life. So that's what he advised me on. Like, unless you want to really take this street life to the grave, quite literally, or jail, then you should just get a job and accept what freedom looks like as an oppressed person, or, a citizen, quote unquote. So that was why I got out the streets, is because I didn't want to take the efforts of being in the streets. Eventually you might have to do a crime that, will require you to do a lot of time. So let's move on from that subject, right? Because when I finally gained employment, like meaningful employment, it was when I was in Philadelphia. And that's why I came up here, so that I could improve the quality of my life. So it's like, along with me earning a little more, the cost of living went up, but this is not an economic conversation. The first year I ever made $30,000, in taxable money, I actually felt rich. Like the fact that I could predict my outcome and set myself up knowing what my outcome what my income would be was so different, because even though I could make up to $10,000 a month sometimes in the streets, I couldn't predict the money, and it was a lot more of a faster pace. So if I spent 2 weeks earning $6,000 and then spending $3,000 to get more product, and then using the other $3,000 to just live and improve the quality of my life, pretty much blowing the money, and then I used that $3,000 to get another $6,000. By the end of the month, I had generated $12,000 in revenue, right? So some years as a 18, 20-year old, I would at least do 60 or $70,000 in a year. So making my first legal $30,000 actually felt a lot different. I can tell you this now. Anybody who's ever been in the streets who finally gets a job, if you haven't noticed, they always do a tremendous job with the money. They always know how to make the most out of the money. Even to this day, I can live on about $12,000 annually, despite what my rent may be or may not be. But that's also considering my rent, because I can live in the most impoverished environments and flow and float and find peace and harmony and like navigate that space without any of the, propagated dangers that are placed on impoverished neighborhoods. You're going to get robbed and hurt by some random black man in the street who wants to take your innocence and all of that, right? But on a day-to-day basis, it's very, very chilling. It's just dilapidated, and the people who service us are generally racist or prejudiced, to say the least. So those are usually your most volatile interactions, is with the service providers in your environment, not the people you're communing with and see on a daily basis. So when I made that $30,000 that year, I was able to buy hundreds of t-shirts. I mean, I bought hundreds of t-shirts that I sold at shows. I threw shows, two of them that year. I started my own commercial space the year following. I bought a camera. I learned several skills, and I was able to develop a social media following by going to over like 40 events that year and networking. I mean, I had so much autonomy after work, and I still went to work, right? I still did my 30 to 40 hours a week, and I still had a social life because I had already had the pace of moving a lot around and like making sure that I took care of my responsibilities, as well as, lent myself to my extracurriculars, which were just simply self-development. Like I didn't just go to bars and watch movies and buy clothes and do things that people usually do with a job. I was reinvesting in myself because I already knew the value of that from being in the streets, constantly reinvesting in myself, every single dollar reinvesting in myself, right? So when I had that $30,000 a year job, it showed me how much I could get done. I had a conversation with my manager that day. Well, there was a significant day. I had a conversation with my manager, who eventually then became my business partner. But at the time, we were just getting to know one another. And I told them, I said, man, if I could just make $50,000, I would be set. I mean, you give me 10 years of making $50,000, I could easily make $1,000,000. That's my mindset, even to this day. Shoot, I could probably get it done in 5 years with the acumen I have now, because of just knowing how to invest in the stock market and keep, low credit utilization. And I could easily get access to $1,000,000 worth of capital if given $50,000 annually to, pay my bills with and all of that, because it's such a significant amount of money. Like you can literally compound the interest on things to the point where it's like you're making money hand over fist. If I make 100, if I don't make 1,000,000, I know I could save 100,000 easily. So I mentioned this because her response to that was, well, I make $58,000 as your assistant manager and I got all types of debt, right? And my response to her was, in a longer banter, I'm swimming through this as quickly as possible. I had made a reference to Jay-Z, and I told her at the time, I was maybe 24 or 25. I said, well, Jay-Z didn't drop Reasonable Doubt until he was 27, and now he's a billionaire. So my point of mentioning that today and even then is, you can get started knowing this information later with the skills that you've learned in uncontrollable environments or volatile experiences like the hood, and it completely transfers over. This is why felons and people who went to prison and people who lived in poverty are so successful when they finally get some resources, is because they actually know the value of a dollar on a daily basis, right? versus if you've just always been around the money all the time, given to you through legitimate practice. You don't really, appreciate the money, and you think life is about working for other people, which is super detrimental. You know what I'm saying? Like the fact that I've had to live without employment the majority of my adult life allows me to know that there's a possibility that I can live without a job. Other people would genuinely believe within a year that they would become homeless and like completely vulnerable to um, being impoverished forever, like that they wouldn't be able to get out of it. And so I stress, the reality of business to people and being in the streets as a correlation, because there's two different types of businesses that you can do, man. You can do like real political, empowering work with your business, or you can be a capitalist and drain the people around you. And that was what I saw being in the streets, was the difference between good street practice and bad street practice. And that also goes with good legitimate business, and there's bad legitimate business where people are purely running scams all the time. And this is what I was saying as far as the trap of the legit hustle, because some people can do the most legal work and it's the most oppressive, dangerous work on the planet. I don't want to name those things because I don't want to guilt anybody, but we all have somebody we can point a finger at. If you don't think your job is bad, I'm pretty sure you think somebody else's job is bad, that it hurts children, that it oppresses people, that it marginalizes people, that it underpays people in the name of capitalism so that rich people can get richer, right? And a lot of times when you're black, you think money can heal you. You think money is going to be the way for you to heal childhood wounds, heal poverty that you experience, like myself, heal parental loss, familial loss, lack of friendships or community and stuff like that. Like, and it's not a black thing. I'm just speaking to black people specifically because that's the experience that I've witnessed all my life and that I've experienced along with people, is that you think the money's going to save you, right? When really you're going to save yourself and the money is a tool. Like right now, I'm currently in credit card debt, but I used that credit card debt literally so that I could secure a place to live. Like it wasn't a choice. I had to go into credit card debt to secure my apartment. And I had to use some of the other credit card debt that I had in order to secure the resources that I currently have for my business. These were not choices that I could make other than going to work. I always can go to work. And I had a job at the time, and it wasn't sufficient enough for me to make a way out of the job. I would pay my bills, and that was it. Um, it did help me get out of credit card debt, and then I eventually got back into it, because these are just the things that I've found that are necessary to do. If you have any feedback, I'd love to hear your feedback. This would also be a good opportunity for me to talk about the brand that I started with my credit card debt, right? So, Still Growing is a lifestyle brand that I created that navigated me through healing. And the tools that I was using was community, being in spaces with people who cared about me, wellness, which was just practicing like nature therapy, being outside, eating better with nutrition, gaining a knowledge of self, doing homework on the past, along with just creativity, right? Having an outlet that didn't have me doing things that was just spending my money practicing consumerism. I believe being a creator is the future versus the consumerism that we've been indoctrinated with. I'll use that word because consumerism has depleted a large quality of our lives. But now also starting my agricultural journey, being inspired by, my ancestors, being inspired by my community and knowing the impact of food instability and a lack of clean water in communities that I lived in. I wanted to take that as a responsibility. So that's what Still Growing is about, is advocating for those things and creating a space for us inside of, the majority owned spaces as well. Like it's not a black thing, it's a people thing, it's a humanity thing. And that was my way of being able to connect with people outside of my community as well, is in it, and bridging that gap. So that was what I invested in. That was what my credit cards had invested in, was the products and the website and pretty much the product and the website. And man, that interest rate is getting me. So as we wrap up, right, today, right, the takeaway that I want to give you all is that freedom is super important. Freedom in your mind, freedom in your heart, right? There are things that would weigh on me, like past relationships, trauma from my past, and even like future anxiety about where I'm going to be and how things are going to go. And, giving ourselves grace is why I started still growing, and so that I could feel free. I wanted to at least feel free, even if I wasn't going to be free on a day to day basis on paper. Like I said, I still carry debt. I still got bills. I still am trying to figure out how to make my business consistent. And that's why I wanted to talk about the trap of the legal hustle, is because some of us get a job and we invest the money very well, right? I have a practice that I have called 50-30-20, right? Where only 50% of your money should be going to bills and stuff. So if I make $1,000, only 500 of that I'll allocate to bills, and of that 500, only 70% of that at most can go towards housing, right? So just to be very simple with the numbers here, um, $375 I would only spend on my rent. So out of $1,000, 375 of it would go to my rent, and then 30% of it would be simply to just do what I want to do. So out of $1,000, $300 would go to taking my girlfriend out, practicing a new recipe in the house, investing in a streaming service that I want to watch or something, right? Just purely this, the rewards of my hard work. And then 20% of it at minimum, I would like to invest. Part of my leisure and part of my entertainment is investing. So sometimes my 30% goes into my 20% of my investments, but that's just how I rock. I like investing. But like, that's a strategic way of, practicing your legitimate moves and hustle in this world, and not letting it, create your trap. Because some of us over invest, right? We make $1,000 and by the end of the month we spent 1,500. So then now we're stuck to the job, we're creating debt, and that's because we can predict our income to pay the minimum balance. And that was what I learned being in the streets, is that you always had to be your best investor. You always had to be liquid in capital. You always had to be able to plan for a rainy day. And I took those skills and those qualities and those characteristics, right? These are characteristics. Was embedded in my character. I brought it over into being a legitimate business, and it's helped me a lot. Even knowing how to navigate survival strategically, right? And it's not even survival at that point. I want to affirm that knowing how to navigate strategically with minimal resources, really, it's not about being in survival. I don't ever feel like I'm in survival. I feel like I'm making choices that align with my values and my morals. And that's why even having this publication was important, because I truly believe that I'm going to build this up to be able to cover all of these expenses and things that we've mentioned here today. So, without any further ado, we're going to end this by just saying the Substack is $8. Subscribe today so that we can continue to build new media platforms like Newports and News, right? And so that you can be promoted on the platform as well, right? When you pay the $8, you get into the chat, you can talk to me about promoting your products, promoting your new projects, promoting your publications, your events, right? This is a form of advertisement. Typically, we go on Meta or we go on Google to buy advertisement space, and they don't have any customer data that they can just give you for free. So that's why this also comes with a price as well. But it's definitely not going to be as much as what they would charge you. So if you're interested in being a part of our monthly newsletter, let me know. It starts at $8, and that $8 goes back into making this publication larger so that your message is heard by more people. So with all that being said, I'll see y'all next time, and hopefully we'll have a name for this publication by then.